Sharma ji, and he is teaching in Aligarh Muslim University in the Department of English. He has done his PhD from the same department, and he has experience of almost 5 years. And he's also a content writer for different digital mediums. In past 1 years, he has been worked for. He was working for various websites. And apart from this, he has very keen interest in film studies. And for this area, to develop himself more and to know more, he has gone to Film Television Institute, which is there in Pune, and he has done his summer course over there, which has enriched his knowledge in film studies. And he's also doing a research project on some cinema, which is under the National Film Archive of India, and which is known as something which is very prestigious. He's also a creative writer. He has done various translations for the from English to Hindi and Hindi to English. And we look forward to his session because we have seen that he comes with lots of preparation. And I'm sure students are going to get enlightenment, and their scope of knowledge is going to be widened after his lecture. So we welcome you, Mr. Sunij Sharma, for your lecture on Renaissance and Humanism.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I'm thankful to all of you for inviting me for this lecture. I'm extremely sorry I could not come here on time because I had to take 2 vivas today. So because of that, the whole schedule was disturbed. And I'm extremely sorry for that. And I sincerely apologize for all these things. So I'm going to start on with my lecture. So can I know about the students, like from which stream they are, which courses?
They are mostly they are English honors students. They are undergraduate students. Some PG students have also joined.
Okay, thank you so much. So so today I'm going to speak on the topic Renaissance and humanism. And as you all know that I'm going to talk about this topic, which is actually a very popular topic, and I think we all are having knowledge about this. We have some ideas related to Renaissance. We talk about different kinds of Renaissance in different societies, in different time periods. And even if you talk about the history of English literature, there is one period which is a very remarkable period. In fact, I would say that there are 2 periods in the history of English literature which are very remarkable periods. One is Romanticism, which is known as British Romanticism, and the other is Renaissance. And when we talk about Renaissance, we all know that if you look at the history of English literature, we start from the Anglo-Saxon period, and then we reach to the Middle Ages. Then we talk about the Renaissance. And if you look at the Renaissance, it is also further subdivided into different ages. We have, for example, Jacobean age, Caroline age, Commonwealth period, which is also known as Puritan interregnum. And the very first period is the Elizabethan period. So we have the 4 subdivisions which are part of Renaissance period. We have Elizabethan, Jacobean, Caroline, and Puritan interregnum. And if you look at the history of English literature, you will find that this period, Renaissance, it's one of the most crucial, things which happened in the history of English literature in relation to the publication of literature, in relation to the publication of different philosophical books, and as well as in relation to the development of human thinking and the emergence of humanities, or what you call humanism. So these are things which are quite related to one another. What do we mean by humanities? What do we mean by humanism? And what about those famous statements or ideas which came into existence during the Renaissance time period? For example, the spirit of inquiry, the spirit of reasoning, the spirit of questioning, which is actually one of the most prominent. And if you look at all these developments during the Renaissance time period, these developments were not only taking place in the field of literature, they were taking place simultaneously in different other discourses, in the discourse of philosophy, in the discourse of sciences, because earlier people used to believe, and scholars used to say that philosophy is the mother of all sciences. So we used to see that we used to believe that philosophy and sciences, they both were, simultaneously working, and they were focusing on that spirit of questioning. They were raising doubts regarding things like, how can we explain this universe, how can we explain the objectives of human life, how can we define the human life. And you will find also in the field of arts, or what you call fine arts, or if you look at sculpture or painting, you will find that there were many great artists. Like, we have the Leonardo da Vinci's very famous painting when he talks about the human anatomy. So we see that humanism, or before humanism, we should rather say that a human being, or the human being actually came at the center. Or if you look at the development of last 500 or 600 years, then you will find that before Renaissance time period, religion used to be at the center, especially in the European cultures and European societies. If you look at different kinds of events, or different things which were taking place before Renaissance time period, I mean to say before 15th century, they were largely finding explanation or arguments from religion. But with the coming of Renaissance, what happened that you will see that most of the arguments started coming from the field of sciences, or reasoning, or different logics or arguments which were coming from sciences, philosophy, questioning, debates, discussions. Lots of things were happening. Now the question comes that why different people, whether it be the field of art or philosophy or literature, why they were talking about human being, and why they believe that human being should be at the center of discussion. For example, if you read William Shakespeare, you will find many examples in different tragedies of William Shakespeare, in different comedies of William Shakespeare, in different plays of William Shakespeare, that how he is focusing on the human being. He's talking about man and woman. He's talking about a social order, as well as he's talking about an order which is, uh, you may say, starting from the Almighty God and coming all the way down to the animals, and somewhere in between we can see, the human beings, other different orders. Gods are there, noblemen are there, different kinds of orders were there. And you will find that William Shakespeare, in one of his plays, he defines man as a paragon of animal. And not only William Shakespeare, if you talk about different writers, novelists, they all were doing something. They were talking about lots of things which were keeping, or which were thinking about human being as something like, as the center of different discourses. And because of that, what happened, we started, doing some research and thinking about this idea, that where all this idea was coming from. uh, since we are talking about literature, we are talking about Renaissance time period, so there are different things that we are going to talk about, because as you all know, uh, in literature we see the blend of different cultures, different disciplines. If you remember Roland Barthes, he used to say that uh, a, a literary book, or a normal book, a text, is like a tissue of quotations drawn from innumerable centers of culture. So I will add something to this. I would say, not only a text, but if you focus especially on a literary text, then you will find a literary text seems more like a tissue of quotation, which is drawing different kinds of ideas from different cultures. And if you look at different Renaissance texts, For example, if you take the very famous book, I would also like to show you the copy of that book, which is a very famous book written by Erasmus, and the name of the book was The Praise of Folly. Erasmus was one of those writers and scholars of Renaissance time period who is known as a humanist. We also call Milton a humanist. If you read Paradise Lost, you will find many examples of humanism in the writings of Milton. And if you look at Renaissance, so I'll start once again that how we can figure out this relationship between humanism and Renaissance. I would like to tell you one very interesting thing, which you might find more like a digression. Uh, at Aligarh Muslim University, we have a very renowned professor, he's a retired professor, Professor Emeritus from the Department of History. His name is Professor Irfan Habib. So once he was delivering a lecture on, he was talking about uh, the culture of Delhi and the rise of Urdu language, and he was talking about that how in the 19th century or in the 19th century especially, how Urdu cultures, different kind of Urdu cultures were existing in Delhi. So when he was delivering a lecture on that, he referred to one very interesting thing, and which was also interesting for me and for all those people who are interested in literature, history, or different disciplines of humanities. He was talking about Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the famous scholar who when we talk about Indian Renaissance, we start with the name of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Uh, so he was saying that one day when Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he was writing a memorandum uh, for the rights of the farmers. There was some bill which was passed by the British government and which was against the farmers. So Raja Ram Mohan Roy was writing a memorandum in favor of the farmers. So when he was writing that memorandum, if you read that memorandum, you will find that the very beginning of that memorandum was with a Persian couplet, and that Persian couplet was coming from the great Persian poets of 13th century, 12th century. Like if you look at the Persian poetry of that time, 13th century, 12th century, 14th century, then you will find Persian poetry is very rich. For example, you have great poets like Sheikh Sadi, uh, Shirazi. They are great poets. So that couplet was from Sheikh Sadi and Gulistana Sheikh Sadi. And in that couplet, Raja Ram Mohan Roy was saying, like he was actually quoting the words of Sheikh Sadi. And those words were that if a government or a state can satisfy the farmers or peasants of that country, then that government or state is not in need of army. You don't need an army. You can do without army because the farmers or the peasants are going to protect you from all sorts of troubles for which you need the army. So when he was talking about this idea, he also referred to one more interesting thing, which was quite interesting. He was saying that if you look at Renaissance time period, and not Renaissance, if you think about the French Revolution. In French Revolution, when we think about French Revolution, we talk about the ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity. Then you will find that these ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, they were these ideas were quite new for the European people. But if you look at these ideas and if you try to trace their origin, then you will go somewhere. You will find these ideas in the Oriental world or in the poetry of these poets, the Persian poets of 13th century, 14th century, 12th century. For example, if you talk about that idea which talks about humanity, equality, then you will find that most of the scholars, now we are again coming to the Renaissance time period. I was just talking about the French Revolution. Now I'm coming back to this topic, Renaissance time period. If you think about the Renaissance time period, then you will come to understand, if you read its history, why Renaissance came to Europe. We usually, when we talk about Renaissance time period, as I was telling you, that why do we talk about Renaissance time period? We talk about Renaissance time period when we start focusing on the periods of English literature. We start with Anglo-Saxon, we go to Middle Ages, then we go to Anglo-Saxon, then we talk about the Middle Ages, then we talk about Renaissance time period, which is having Elizabethan, Caroline, Jacobean, Commonwealth period. Then we come to Restoration, and then we talk about Romanticism, British Romanticism, when we had great poets like John Keats, Byron, Sade, Robert Sade, Shelley. Then we come to Victorian time period. So after Renaissance, we have the Restoration, which is also better known as Neoclassical. Then we have the what you call Romanticism, and then Victorian, and then finally modern period, which was uh, dominated by two world wars. And then we talk about, some of us talk about postmodern period. So you will find that usually when we talk about history of English literature, when we try to talk about different periods, we talk about Renaissance as well. And we talk about William Shakespeare, metaphysical poets. We talk about, we focus on different kinds of, writings by Milton and different other poets. But if you read the history of Renaissance, then you will find that when Renaissance came to Europe, it was due to many reasons that we saw the emergence of Renaissance in Europe. And one of these reasons was that after the fall of Constantinople, many scholars from the Arab world, they escaped and they took shelter in European countries, especially Italy. And you will find that if you trace the uh, the travel history of great humanists like Erasmus, then you will find Erasmus visited Italy before becoming a popular scholar in England. He went to Italy, he stayed there for some time, and he in Italy had the chance to interact with some great poets and scholars who had escaped, who had who had taken shelter in that country. He had interactions with them, and those ideas, which were all the way coming from the Oriental world via these European countries, they went to England. And we saw that how these scholars like Erasmus, they did something in the field of literature, art, poetry, whatever you call it, that which together as a whole was doing something for the in the name of humanism. I would like to share with you one MS Word file which is having some major points regarding all this discussion which I'm trying to uh, 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 which I'm trying to have with you, so that, because if you have a look at these points, then you would better be able to understand what I'm talking about, because uh, you might see that I'm having some digression. I'm talking about so many things, so it can be difficult for you. Just give me 30 seconds and I would be able to uh, share with you the screen. Yes, here you go. So as you all can see, I just wanted to show you some points which are related to the, you may call it more like the preparation for the Renaissance time period. So if you look at the time period of Renaissance, it is somewhere the end of 15th century, or rather we can say exactly 1500. If you look at popular books like M.H. Abrams, where you can find the discussion on the periods of English literature, then you will find it says that the Renaissance time period starts in 1500 and it goes on till 1660. So for 160 years, we had the Renaissance time period. And in this time period, as I just discussed with you, that we have four subdivisions: Elizabethan, Jacobean, Caroline, and Puritan interregnum. This period is very crucial for number of things. First of all, English language was trying to get rid of the, you can say, the shadow of Latin language. It was trying to find a new space for itself. During the Renaissance time period, we saw a number of developments in the field of English language, a number of developments which were actually happening in different fields: religion, literature, culture, society, and they were together doing something because of which we saw the rise of modern English. So, again, if you look at the history of English literature, it, it is in no way separate from the history of English language. So, if you look at the history of English literature, you also look at the history of English language. Because when you talk about English language, when we trace its history, we can see three periods, three phases. First phase is the Old English, then we see the Middle English, and then from that Renaissance time period, we talk about the modern English. So, modern English was due to many reasons. It came into existence. Uh, if you read the writings of Chaucer, who was not a Renaissance poet, who actually came before that, if you read Chaucer, you will face many difficulties. And but if you read William Shakespeare, if you read other contemporaries of William Shakespeare, you can easily feel that how English language had changed its, its form, its how different words and expressions were, they were trying to find some definite shape, how the poetry was changing itself, how different kinds of meter rhyme schemes, they were, they started existing in the English language. So Renaissance, first of all, I would like to, as you all know about it, Renaissance is a European phenomenon, which means possibly rebirth or revival or whatever you talk about. So whenever we use Renaissance word, whether we use it in Indian context or European context, we think about revival, rebirth, and the same general cause at work. Liberation of thought from scholasticism was also, a very important part of it, and revolt against the spiritual authority taken up by reformers. New earth sky explored, or rather revealed by astronomers and navigators. So it's all about, like how I was talking about. If you look at how Renaissance came into existence, then there are many things which are associated with it. So as I'm saying, in the field of art, in the field of religion, in the field of literature, a lot of things were taking place. For example, I hope some of you will be knowing that there was a very great reformer whose name was Martin Luther. And Martin Luther is one of the great reformers who did something revolutionary in the field of religion, which also provided a scope of improvement and development for Renaissance time period. And this happened very beautifully. For example, Martin Luther was the person who was the leader of those people who used to believe that Holy Bible is not being fully followed by the church people. The church practices were in many ways different from the way Bible was dictating them to follow the practices. So these differences were highlighted by different scholars. And Martin Luther was the person who actually focused on this idea. And he prepared 98 points, which he uh, said that were those points which were the dissimilarity between the church practices followed by the church, and the arguments which are available in the Bible. So he found out those differences. And there was a very interesting and very revolutionary movement in the history, that in the beginning of Renaissance, when Martin Luther goes before the church. He goes to the Vatican City, and there he was burning those 98 theses, which he found uh, controversial to a certain extent, which he did not find in Bible, but they were being followed by the church people. And that happened because in the Middle Ages, church had become very authoritative, and the church people, they had also become rich, and there was also more like a nexus going on between, which you can call more like a politico religious nexus which was going on. And because of that, that revolt came into existence. So something was happening in the field of religion. Similarly, you talk about great explorers like Galileo, Copernicus. They were doing something in the field of sciences. Even they were having arguments with the religious people. They were having arguments regarding there were arguments regarding that whether we should believe in the heliocentric theory or geocentric theory. For example, the geocentric theory used to believe that Earth is the center of the universe, and heliocentric theory used to believe that helium, like sun, which is made up of helium at large, sun is at the center of the universe. So these two debates were going on. These two topics were debatable, and they were going on. These discussions were going on. So different people were doing different things. Now let's talk about what was happening in the field of different fields in relation to humanism. So if you look at the characteristics of Renaissance, you can find many books on that, and in many books you can find that there are scholars who have talked about different and prominent characteristics of Renaissance. So you will find that one more thing which was very crucial, which was taking place in in the whole of Europe. For example, as I told you, that English, the development of English is very crucial, and we should not forget that the translation of Bible from Latin into English also played a very important role in the development of English language. And not only the translation of Bible, but also those English priests, those English scholars, those religious scholars who used to uh, have discussions on religion, those who used to give different kinds of religious lectures to the believers. They also started taking place in English language, because English that played a very important role, because English was the language with the help of which they were able to communicate with the larger audience. And in 1612, like, there were many translations of Bible, but the most important version came, which is known as the King James version. It came into existence in 1612. And from that moment we saw that how the Bible, the King James version Bible, became not only a religious book, a great religious book throughout Europe, largely in England, but also became a book which was able to teach many people that what is the form of English language. So even I remember that I had some professors when I was in MA, when I was in my graduation, and they used to teach. They used to tell us all the time that if you want to understand English literature, then you should also study New Testament and Old Testament both, because the Bible is can tell you many things, as well as it can also give you some ideas about that. What is the nature of modern English, if you look at its form, if you look at its structure, and if you look at something like, for example, I still remember those people, those poets and scholars who believe that the language of poetry should be simple, they also take arguments from the Bible, because Bible is a very great, the holy book. And what is the purpose of Bible? The words of God, uh, for the mankind, and that too in a very simple language. The language is very catchy, words are very simple, and the expression is very effective. For example, if you take a statement, very simple statement like love thy neighbor, right? So you will feel that it's a very, very, very small statement. But if you look at its meaning, if you look at its power, it's very powerful. So you will also find that Bible was teaching many people not only about religion, not only about religious practices, but also about the beauty of English language. And this all was happening during the Renaissance time period. So both in Renaissance and Reformation, the element of individualism was present. So Reformation was the movement which was led by Martin Luther when he was burning the 98 theses before the in the Vatican City, and he was highlighting that how the church practices are are against the Holy Bible. And because of that, the Reformation took place. And we talked about the Reformation, we talk about the Reformation in Christianity. So both in Renaissance and Reformation, you will find the element of individualism is very prevalent. Now you may ask that what is this individualism? So if you look at this individualism, is it's not having any negative connotation over here. If you look at the Reformation or Renaissance time period, when we are focusing on individualism, we are focusing on individual problems, and we are giving prominence to individual values, so that each and everyone can have a voice. And it's more like you will find that lot of lot of counter arguments were also present at that time. And one important example of this is that if you look at the whole of Europe before Renaissance, the whole of Europe was considered more like a one single unit. There were divisions, there were regional divisions, but there was nothing like the rise of different countries and political boundaries. With the coming of Renaissance, we also saw that different cultures, they started expressing themselves, and they started realizing that they also have a language. For example, this was the time period, the European Renaissance, when Italian language, uh, you may call um, German language, French language, English language, they also started realizing that we should also do something like, we should do something for our own culture, for our own language, for our own people. And they started doing things in that field. So a lot of things were taking place. And you can find this idea is being again but again observed by a very great German writer whose name was Goethe. So Goethe in 19th century, when he was talking about world literature, so he was believing in that idea that how in Renaissance time period we talked about the development of different individual cultures and literature of different languages. For example, French language, German language, Italian language, English language. Then in 19th century, he was thinking about a collective effort which could be taken by which he was believing that they all these countries can take and think about something like a world literature. And he was thinking about that. So that's a different topic, but I'm just trying to focus on that idea that how, in order to, like, the fourth point you can look at, in order to further explore literary beauty, people cultivated the language spoken by each country, and they were doing something in that field. So you know and even if you look at the history of Europe, the last 500 years, then you will find the development which took place in the name of culture and language or literature of these languages. Then it's actually very rich, and it all happened after the Renaissance time period. Before Renaissance, the whole Europe seemed united by same ideals, even after having royal conflicts and power struggles. But after Renaissance, dividing line became apparent. So this dividing line is what? These are the, you can say, more like the political boundaries, but not actually the rise of nation states. If you read about the nation states that we talk about in today's context, for example, you know, it's also debatable that there are many nations in this world which do not belong to the category of nation states. But if you think about the ideas of countries and political boundaries, then you can think about this idea that how Renaissance made it possible for many cultures and countries to see those dividing lines. Spiritual and aesthetic unanimity of Middle Ages seemed broken or disintegrated, but for a positive thing, for not anything negative. So, what was this spiritual and aesthetic unanimity? It was not like that they were revolting against it. They believed that it was something like, if you look at the Middle Ages, you will find that there are many spiritual and aesthetic unanimity of Middle Ages which were prevalent at that time. There were many spiritual ideas, many religious ideas, which were more like a uniting force, and the different kingdoms were there, and some sort of unity was going on. Different kingdoms were there, but it was believed that spiritually Europe uh, was following some ideas, spiritual ideas. But later on, what happened? We saw a break in that. We saw that how that got disintegrated. So France, Italy, England, different countries, they did something, and what they were doing, they were reviving, they were doing something, and you will feel that the reviving spirit was reaching slowly in England in comparison to these countries, France, Italy, and England. And you remember, I tell you that the scholars, you should not forget this, that the scholars, most of the scholars who escaped from, after the fall of Constantinople, from the Oriental side, they took shelter in these countries like France, Italy. And because of that, Renaissance came quite early in countries like France and Italy, and it came quite late in England. And most of the scholars in England who are known as Renaissance scholars, they were taught by different other writers, especially largely by writers who were coming from the Oriental side of the world, and they were taking shelter in countries like Italy and France. I'll give you some example of that. So you will find that, for example, you may find it out that there are many scholars who are known by the who are equally known by the European people and as well as by the Arab people. We talk about Avicenna, and you will find that Avicenna is known by the Arab people as Ibn Sina. So you can also see that how the pronunciation of one single name, one person is having two names, which are slightly different because of the language and the pronunciation, and as well as the cultural expression. And why is it happening? Because the Arabs, they are also believing that we had a scholar like Ibn Sina who went away from this area and took shelter in Europe and became a scholar over there. And similarly, we have many other writers. You can find some good articles on this topic, that how Orientalism, how the Oriental scholars played a very major role in bringing Renaissance spirit to different parts of Europe, or in you can say in the emergence of Renaissance in Europe. So humanism hardly seen influencing the early poetry or drama. If you look at the English poetry, very early English poetry, I'm not talking about William Shakespeare, because in William Shakespeare you can find many examples of humanism. But if you look at the very early poetry, exactly which was written somewhere in the first 2-3 decades of 16th century, 1500 something, you will not find any trace of humanism over there. But gradually it reached to England. And by the beginning of 16th century, language had not attained its full growth. So that's why, what I was telling you, if you look at the translation of Bible which took place, many translations are there, but by the time the King James version was published in 1612, English was about to attain its full growth, and there was no great tradition in prose. Even if you look at the pre-Renaissance writers, there is nothing like prose. They largely focus on something that you can call drama or poetry. That was more more important. These were more important genres of literature. So two important books were published in England. One was the Utopia by Sir Thomas More in 1516, and the other was Francis Bacon's Novum Organum, which actually you can say that these two publications were very important at that time because it was just the beginning of 16th century, or the beginning of Renaissance in England, which received European fame. And but what is important that these two books were written in Latin. They were not in English language, but they got translated into English language. And why this Latin? Because as I was just telling you, that if you look at the modern English, the modern English had many challenges at that time. It also had to find its own existence and identity. Because if you look at the Middle English, if you look at the Middle English largely, it was overloaded, or it was heavily influenced by Latin language. And because lots of translations which were taking place in English language, they were coming from Latin, and lots of writers who were writing in English language for the first time, they were originally coming from Latin literature, or Latin language. And there were many writers at that time, in the beginning of Renaissance time period, who were equally doing contributions to the field, to Latin language and English language. So now, a few more things which are very important. uh, the verse was definitely shaped by until 1579, and it seemed disordered from the time of Chaucer. So I was talking about that, how Renaissance also played a very important role. The developments which were happening in the field of language also played a very important role in the development of English poetry. And you will find that when final syllabic became mute, Chaucer's meter was wrongly read, ill transcribed. So they are. I'm trying to say that in this point, that how different kinds of understanding also taking place regarding poetry, meter, rhyme, and ideas which were related to the verse experiment. So you will feel that when we see a blooming period in England, magnificent Italian literature became decadent. And if you remember that statement, I'm just trying to sum it up once again, that in Italy and France, Renaissance came quite early. In England, it reached quite late. We have, France had produced at that time major writers, like we have François Rabelais, Pierre de Ronsard, or we have Montaigne's essays. I hope some of you will be knowing about Montaigne. When we talk about the tradition of essay writing, Montaigne comes as a very great example from French language. And these people were writing, doing something in the field of prose writing. So this was also there. And you can find that many things were actually happening over there. Now let's talk about the beginning of humanism, how humanism actually reached to England. So from 1419 to 1520, at a time when religious quarrels were, they were popular, a scholarship blossomed in England, which was a very true, serious, and serene in its spirit and full of hope. This scholarship was the scholarship of humanism. And after what actually happened, so I'm again, putting the same thing in points which I just discussed with you in the beginning of my lecture. So after the Turks captured Constantinople in 1453, Italy provided a shelter to the exiles, and some young Englishmen who were eager to learn Greek from these exiles they were drawn to Italy. So you will find that there were many scholars from different areas, because you will find that, this, if you look at this, the history of Constantinople, or the fall of Constantinople in 1453, then you will find it was something which is more like a power related phenomena, a power related phenomenon. And when you will find that in the history of the world, in any country, whenever there is anything which is related to power relations or violence, writers or literary people or the artists are the people who always feel like unsecured, and they do something, they always want to find a secure shelter. So they always go in search of some peaceful areas. So this was happening in in some part of, you can say, in some part of the world at that time. And the areas, or the which were related to Turkey and some other countries were there. So the scholars from these spaces, they were taking shelter in Europe. And what actually happened, so when the scholars came to countries like Italy, and uh, they took shelter over there because they found some peaceful space over there. I would also like to tell you about a very famous family which was known as Medici family from Italy, which was known as the family for encouraging the artistic spirit as well as the developments in the field of literature and sciences. Medici family was also known for giving shelter to many great scholars and artists. So Italy became a very important center, a very happening place. And a lot of scholars from England also went to Italy, and they went over there to learn the Greek language as well. So there were some people who started examining the Greek manuscripts, and these Greek manuscripts were saved from destruction. And it was like a new learning for these English people who had came all the way from England to Italy. These so these we have some names like William Grossin, we have Thomas Linacre, and we have John Colet. So Thomas Linacre was a physician and a scholar. We have John Colet. These are few people who actually uh, found the found the opportunity, who got the opportunity to examine the Greek manuscripts. So these three scholars, they established a sound teaching of Greek at Oxford. So if you look at the Oxford scholarship, it's not something new, it's very old. You can trace its history all the way back to Renaissance time period. So these three scholars who had the chance in Italy to examine the Greek manuscripts, they came back to England, and they, after learning Greek from these scholars who were taking shelter in Italy, they learned Greek language as well as some ideas from Greek manuscripts, and they established a sound teaching of Greek language at Oxford University. Now, there is one more interesting thing which I want to talk about, which you may call a bit digressive. Uh, if you look at the teaching of literature and languages in Europe, then you will find, especially in England, not Europe, in England, then if you think about great universities like Oxford University, then you will find English language teaching is not something which is very old for the English people, because they, if you look at the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century, you will find that the English people were not interested in learning English at universities. They were interested in learning Latin or Greek languages. That's why if you talk about the Romantic poets, if you talk about different Victorian writers, they all were attending classes of Greek language, Latin language. They were reading classical poets. They were not finding any great hope or something very promising in learning English more like a language at a university. The literacy rate was very low at that time in 18th century, even in 18th century. So if you think about the Renaissance time period, that was the beginning of more like a scholarship or teaching at that time. So there is no sense of talking about English language teaching or anything like that. English language teaching is something which starts existing, which started somewhere during the colonial time period, and it is actually meant for the non-English nations, or it actually existed outside Europe. So you can think about, third world countries, or the South Asian countries, or African nations, or something like that. Because the English people, they knew the language. They only wanted to explore great classical ideas. So whatever they were doing in the field of literature or arts or music, uh, or sciences, sorry, not music but sciences largely, and they were focusing on this that classical Greek literature. So Erasmus came to learn from these scholars. Erasmus's name is also there in the list. Erasmus also came to learn from these scholars, and if you talk about Cole's influence, it nurtured Erasmus and led him towards a reformation. So if you trace the genealogy of Erasmus's learning, the man who was writing a book by the name the the Praise of Folly, which is considered one of the you know interesting books, or one of the wonderful texts on humanism at that time. So if you trace the scholarship of Erasmus, he was influenced by Colet, and Colet was trained by the Greek scholars where in Italy. Those Greek scholars who were taking shelter in in Italy. So you will find that it's not only about Erasmus, but there are many scholars, many Renaissance scholars, who were either taught by the Greek scholars or the Arab scholars or other Oriental scholars who who had escaped from their countries because of different political conditions, and they were taking shelter in Europe, and their ideas became popular throughout Europe and later on in England. And that's why I was saying that if you look at even if you look at that, how French Revolution started talking about these ideas like equality, fraternity, liberty. You will not find examples of these ideas, examples related to these ideas before Renaissance in Europe, but you can find ideas related to these examples in Oriental world. The you will you if you talk about the history of Oriental world, then you can find there are many books, there are many texts which have talked about humanity, which have talked about in poetry, which have talked about humanity, liberty, equality at length, right? But in Europe, it became so much promising after Renaissance time period. And Renaissance is also very important time period because it's more like a transition period for whole of Europe, when we can see a great shift of learning and transfer of knowledge from one great space to another great space. And it was not, I'm not saying that it was simply the transfer of knowledge from Oriental to the Occidental world. It was more like a good interaction which took place due to some political conditions, some other kind of travel experiences which took place at that time. And there is one more interesting thing. If you look at, as I was telling you in the beginning, that Renaissance time period, it is known for different spirits, those spirits which became prominent in Europe for a longer period of time. We saw them uh, till the beginning of 20th century. After the 20th century, we saw that because of the World War, because of the things like which happened in different the world wars which happened in Germany, the rise of Auschwitz and different kind of killings and bloodshed, those spirits got dismantled. But until 20th century, you can see that the spirits, like the spirit of inquiry, the spirit of questioning, the spirit of reasoning, the spirit of discovery, the spirit of exploration, the spirit of humanism, they all became so prominent in the Renaissance time period that it uh, it actually guided Europe for 400 years or 300 years. So you can see these influences over there. Erasmus, he was having wit, and he had a passionate admiration for Greek classics. And The Praise of Folly is a very important book by this writer. uh, Now I would like to talk about something from the book in praise of the praise of folly. Then I will take some more time, then I'll stop. So I would like to just give me 30 seconds, and I want to show you the book, The Praise of Folly, and then I will talk about uh, why I'm focusing on this particular text, The Praise of Folly by Erasmus, to talk about humanism. So if you have a look at uh, this book, which is which I'm just going to share with you, The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. So here you go. This is the book, as you all can see, and full screen mode. So if you have a look at this book, The Praise of Folly by Erasmus, uh, it's published by Princeton Classics, and it's with a new forward by Anthony Grafton. So let's have a look at this book. The Praise of Folly by Desiderius Erasmus. It is translated from Latin with an essay and commentary by Hoyt Hopewell Hudson, with a new foreword by Anthony Grafton. Princeton University Press, Princeton, Oxford. So you will find, as I was telling you, that Thomas More's Utopia or Bacon's Novum Organum, and even this book, The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. These works, they were published like in Latin language, and they became famous. But but you may ask this question, that when they were published in Latin, then why are we talking about these works in English language? You will find that at that time, that was a that was the transition period, as I just said to you. Why it was a transition period? It was a period of change when English society was finding its own identity, its own culture, its own people. It was setting its own boundary, linguistic boundary, political boundary, cultural boundary. And that was a time when it started believing that, okay, we are done with Latin. We have lots of we have lot of Latin, but we should do something now. Think about how, what about English people? What about English culture and all that? So you will find English was not having a great heritage to celebrate. And you know what happens if you think about any country or any nation, a nation which is not having a history to celebrate, what it has to do, it has to create a history or either borrow it from somewhere else. So what was happening, a lot of borrowing was taking place in the name of translation. Translation is not something which is very new. Translation and interpretation is not something which is very new. It has been existing for very a long time. And you can see that how Latin was influencing, was helping them, the English people, to to develop, to think about developing their own language, ideas. They were borrowing ideas from different culture, and that's why Renaissance came to England. It came to the whole of Europe, but England benefited from it largely. And let's have a look at this book. And if you again look at, uh, if you talk about English literature, different critics and scholars and thinkers who have done something in the field of criticism and theory in 20th century. For example, if you talk about the new historicism, which is a very, very remarkable, part of, you can say, this postmodern thinking, or postmodern ideas which started existing after 1960s or 70s, which started talking about language, discourse, culture, descriptions, thick descriptions. Lots of things are there. You will find, for the new historicist people, the most important period was the period of Renaissance, when they had, this was the only period from where they borrowed, or they actually uh, uh, found in that period some texts which they started studying in order to talk about different kind of cultural expressions, textuality of history, historicity of texts, and all these kind of debates. So you will find Renaissance or Renaissance texts have been considered by the new historicist people uh, as very important texts, as very important texts, and these new historicist people who talk about, textuality of history and historicity of texts, they, believe in that then, Renaissance texts are very beautiful texts, that if you want to study that, this idea with the ideas which are propagated by new historicist people. So that's again, one more digression. So if you have a look at the content, a prelude to the praise of folly, to the Princeton Classics edition, acknowledgements, we have the folly of Erasmus and essay. uh, so what is interesting about this book, what this book is actually doing, this book is more like a satire about different kinds of follies which exist amongst human beings, as well as it's also a celebration of the spirit of folly which exists in human society. And you might find it quite wondering that how can somebody write a book by the name Praise of Folly? Because folly, when we talk about folly, or we are talking about something like a joke, something like a humor or fool, these are the things which are not considered very interesting, or these are the things which are considered serious. We talk about serious things. We want to talk about discourses which are quite rational, quite argumentative. But what about fools and folly and different kinds of things? But this is something interesting. And why is it interesting? If you look at the history of Europe, now I'm talking about the whole of Europe. If you look at the history of Europe, then you will find that before 17th century, a fool was not a problematic thing. A madman was not a problematic thing. It became a problematic thing after the 17th century. If you read post-structuralist thinkers like Michel Foucault and other scholars, even Derrida also talks about that, refers to that rather. But Michel Foucault largely talks about it. If you read the famous book by Michel Foucault, Madness and Civilization, then there is a discussion on this book. There is a discussion about the appearance of fool in different plays of William Shakespeare. Even William Shakespeare is making a fool a character. And what is the role of a fool? If you think about different character, if you think about William Shakespeare's very famous play King Lear, what King Lear is telling the fool? King Lear is asking the fool, show me some wisdom. I need some wisdom. I demand some wisdom from you. Why is he saying that? Because it was believed during the Renaissance time period. This was the spirit of humanism. It was believed that even a fool can say something more rational than the normal human beings, because the normal was not considered opposite to abnormal. In fact, there was nothing like abnormal which was believed. It was, these are more like, we started believing in binaries quite late in relation to follies. So this is one very beautiful example, if you want to understand that how a fool can provide wisdom to King Lear, or is over there in the play. But after 17th century, we see that these kind of expressions are absent from all the texts. And why it happened? Because we saw a change in the humanistic values. If you read this, what does it say? I would like to read the first paragraph and then we'll talk about it. The praise of folly began as an elaborate joke to be shared with a close friend. According to an old story in 1499, when Desiderius Erasmus of Rotterdam first came to England, he met a brilliant young man at a table of the Lord Mayor of London. The two of them argued, cut followed thrust, learned joke kept learned joke. Finally, Erasmus said, either you are more or no one. Erasmus was right, and Thomas More, his dinner companion, replied in the same spirit, you are either Erasmus or the devil. In fact, Erasmus and More were properly introduced, but that was pretty much the only proper thing about their friendship, which grew, as the story suggests, from a shared sense of humor. In 1505, when Erasmus returned to England, they worked together on translations from Greek into Latin. Their author, Lucian, was a satirist like them, a learned joker. So, a joker who's intelligent, a joker who's a genius, a joker who can behave like a philosopher. And if you remember, if you look at the English quotes, the popular English quotes or proverbs, some people say that a philosophers are partially mad. Think about that idea. These philosophers were looking at Latin language, Latin poets, Latin to England, how he had this idea that we have to translate texts from Greek into Latin, and we have to. And they were not simply doing something for the development of Latin language; they were also doing something for the development of English culture, because English was the next step. They were not having that thing in their mind. So, if you read this text, at least the beginning of this text, then you will find, you know, this text is not only a satire on the humanity, it also praises the folly, the presence of folly in amongst human beings. And this is something which is quite interesting. Let me tell you one more thing, then I would like to stop, because we are possibly running, I don't know about the time, we are possibly running short of time. uh,
No,
so
Sunij, you have time. You
okay,
can continue with what is.
thank you so much. uh, so again, if you look at this book, the in the praise of folly, then you will find that Erasmus's little book announced from the start that it belonged to an ancient genre of pedantic humor. Since antiquity, orators had practiced as one of their standard exercise the writing of speeches in praise of people, building, and cities. And since antiquity, satirists had made fun of these speeches by writing parodies of them. They pretend to praise, as Erasmus put it, Buceries, Falerises, quartan, fevers, flies, birdness, and pests of that sort. In praising folly, Erasmus made clear he worked within the classical tradition in literature, a point he went on to underline by casting his work in elaborate, demanding Latin, and by stuffing it with allusions, not only to Lucian but also to other favorite writers from the Roman poet, Horace and Plato. So why these people were looking at Greek language, Latin poets, Greek writers, because they believe that, as I just shared with you, English was not having any great heritage. They had to, create one. And how could they create that? They could create that with the help of translation of ideas from different cultures, by borrowing ideas from different cultures, And that's why, you will, if you later on, if you start reading texts by plays by William Shakespeare, poetry of Milton, when we talk about Milton, we also call him a humanist, because when Milton is saying in Paradise Lost, when he talks about Jesus Christ, what he says, Jesus Christ, for Jesus Christ, he's using the words to justify the ways of God to men, to justify the ways of God to men. So you will find that when, even when Milton is talking about religion, how Milton's discourse on religion is very different from the uh, other discourses which took place before Renaissance. It was about religion, but even the religion was keeping, or was putting man at the center, to justify the ways of God to men, and to think about, you know this idea that how we can think about a culture, the we can understand this idea, which is, in collectivity we can call it humanism. So when we talk about, we can find many examples. And the way Milton also gave the rhetorical language to the Saturn, even in those expressions you can find different visions which are related to humanism. uh, Further, I would like to highlight some part of this book, that if you read, uh, you'll find some acknowledgements part is there. The Folly of Erasmus. Uh, Again, I would like to read some section from it. Then I'll stop. Through more than 4 centuries, the world has found this book useful. Now, they are saying about 4 centuries, but why useful? As with so many good things, those who have had most need for it have failed to use it. But as also with many great books, beyond its audience of readers has extended a wide fringe of influence, within which have stood the many who have known that such a book existed, have known too that there was something electric in it, and that its author transmitted through it, as he did not through other of his labors, a spirit whose working sends our mind at once to parable of the Gospels. Whereunto shall I liken the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. Yet while this point to the subtle nature of Erasmian force and to its manner of diffusion, this gives no account of its direction or content, unless we make bold to press the citation and associate the spirit in question with the kingdom of the parable. So you can find that he's, in this book, he has reflected on parables, different kinds of ideas. The catalogers put praise of folly on the shelf of satire. If you look at different scholars writings, they believe that praise of folly is more like a book of satire, any normal book of satire, but with reason. So he's talking about folly and he's talking about reason. I would like to highlight few things which were said by Michel Foucault, who was a 20th century literary theorist from France. And if you read the writings of Michel Foucault, then you will find he was also very interested in reading the Greek culture, Greek literature, as well as the Renaissance people, Renaissance literature. He also talked about the praise of folly by Erasmus. And he also used to believe that, the kind of problems at the level of language and discourses which which actually occurred after the 17th or 18th century were not problematic, were not so problematic, were not existing even during the Renaissance time period, or even in many Greek cultures. There are a lot of problems at the level of language, at the level of understanding, at the level of you can say ordering, in the name of putting things in order, in the name of having a liberal attitude. We brought in language, we brought in discourses, we brought in our society. So you will find Michel Foucault that used to say that to I'm not reasonable enough to discard a madman, and I'm not mad enough to discard uh, something reasonable. So when he used to make these kind of statements, he used to talk about the problems which occur in our society because of the kind of binary we have created between normal and abnormal. So this book can give you a very interesting idea about, you know not only about, it's not simply about the fools or jokes or the idea of humor or something like a satire. It's actually about humanism. It's actually about the human society. And you know there are many people who want to talk about humanism. They actually most of the time begin with a criticism. So yet we do wrong to make this classification too casually or too absolutely. Satire is directed at an object or at objects within the actual view of the satirist. Thus, Erasmus makes ridiculous the dishonest and irreligious monks who infested some of the orders. He attacks both by analysis and by parody the methods of biblical interpretation used by scholastics or by interpreters without Greek or Hebrew. But the vitality of the book does not lie in these jibes or attacks. It owes far more to the comprehensive irony which informs these and other passages where he is pleading, ever so obliquely, more for tolerance, for an understanding of human nature. This is so important, for an understanding of human nature. So, what is actually humanism? When we talk about humanism, it is about human beings. Yes, you're right. It's about the understanding of human nature. It is also about having humanism at the center of different discourses, right? And if you talk about, even like, I would again like to quote the postmodern thinkers. The postmodern thinkers used to believe, and they still believe, many of them, that Renaissance was the time period which we can call the birth of man, which was the time when the birth of man took place. And why do we call it a birth of man? It's not like the actual evolution, the point where the evolution started, or anything like the actual birth of mankind. Because that was the time when the scholarships, different scholarships, they realized the existence of humanism, human beings, and things related to human beings. So, if the book were, as some have seemed to consider it, an unbroken series of satirical comments, unless it had a positive spirit greater than the keenness or deafness or disinfectant power of these, we could not read it at this late time with edification. So, I'm just going to stop in 2-3 minutes. I'm done with that. And there are few other things which I wanted to highlight, but actually I'm not able to find them now right now. So I will share with you the text. I will share the text with the organizers, and uh, I will also I'm also having some other study material which I will share with the organizers, and I would request them to share it with the students who are listening to me at the moment. So one more thing. Uh, yeah. So, for example, let's have a look at this paragraph. In Midsummer Night's Dream, you know, he burlesque plays put on by groups of tradesmen. So, we are actually talking about. We are actually talking about, how the reader, like, look at the reader. For example, let us take one at an opposite extreme. Uh, I think I'm not able to find that exact paragraph. So I'm actually going to stop here because it will be very confusing if I'm going to put it without a context. I'm going to stop here. Uh, I think, sir, I would like to stop here. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Uh, I was just trying to explain humanism, but I think uh, I was just trying to talk about it. But there are few things which I couldn't properly highlight or talk about. Uh, Thank you so much. So I would like to stop here.
Thank you so much, Sunij.
Most welcome.
Yeah, yeah. We have some questions, and I would like to put forward. There is one question from Alia Naz. What is the most significant difference between Renaissance ideas and those of Middle Ages, and how did wars affect humanism? This is what she asks.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it needs some explanation, but if you look at the differences, if you talk about the differences, the ideas of, can you repeat your question once? Can you repeat the question once again,
Yeah, she
please?
wants to understand that what is the most significant difference between Renaissance ideas and those of Middle Ages.
Those of middle. Thank you so much. So if you talk about the ideas which were popular in the Middle Ages, or if you look at the Renaissance ideas, then the most important, the most significant difference was that as I told you in the beginning, that if you look at the discourses which were taking place in the Middle Ages, they were largely drawing arguments from religious discourses. And as I told you, that if you look at the history of Middle Ages, then you will find that different conflicts which were going on between kingdoms, amongst kingdoms, and the kind of power nexus which was playing a very effective role, the power nexus between the church and different monarchs and kings and queens. Because of that, what was happening, that if you look at the center of discourse, all meanings were being drawn from the kind of arguments which were being molded in the name of religion, largely. And because of that, what was happening, it was believed, for example, uh, if you talk about the Middle Ages, then one of the popular ideas was that there is a God Almighty, and then the kings and queens are more like the representatives of that God. Okay. And because kings and queens are the representatives, so nobody can question them. And who was giving these kings and queens the authority to be the representative? It was being supported and highly, you can say, this support was being given by the church people. So some sort of a nexus was going on, and because of that, the center of discourse was not having humanism at there. And that's why I was saying that when you talk about the rise of the beginning of Renaissance, you also see the birth of man. And what do I mean, the birth of man? The birth of man is all about that the discourse which is putting man at the center came into existence, which is totally absent. And I wouldn't say absent, it was not, even actually existing at that time. Nobody was thinking about it. So if you think about something like, say, I will take one more example. If you think about the famous scientist, or who is also known as a philosopher, whose name was Rene Descartes, French philosopher. We also call him a mathematician, and I know some of you would have read him in the books of mathematics. He used to say, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. This idea cannot exist in the Middle Ages. It can only exist during the Renaissance time period. Why? Because somebody was able to think about this idea, can question the idea that how can I exist, and why do I exist, and what is the thing in relation to which I exist, and what are the things in relation to which I exist. So all these ideas, if you look at them, you can find that there are significant differences between what was prevalent during the Middle Ages and what became prevalent during the Renaissance time period. I was just trying to uh, answer the question. It may
I'm
not be
sure
the final
Alia,
answer. Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Okay. So Alia has got her answer, and now we have next question from Rajshri, and she's interested in knowing that how Renaissance is often credited with for the rise in nationalism, but did it not, on the contrary, and in a broader sense, destroyed the spirit of unity and diversity in Europe?
Okay, thank you so much. Uh, Actually, if I talk about this idea that how it was a kind of you know a positive uh, a positive development, not a negative development, when during the Renaissance time period, different nations were uh, talking about the rise of nationalism. So it demands some sort of a study, some study, some study of what was happening in uh, in different cultures, what kind of things were taking place, and what kind of transition period was going on at that time. I would like to say just two three things about that. First of all, uh, if you look at that time period, the Renaissance time period, it can be debatable that whether it was a positive development, whether it was challenging the unity, or whether they were finding another way of thinking about their own, talking about their own culture, their own language. That's why I was saying that it has been said by largely by scholars that Reformation and Renaissance, it actually focused on this idea of individualism. And this individualism was actually doing something positive. So, how can we do that positive thing? It was something like, for example, you can think about a country like Germany or think about France, that it's doing something for the development of its language, its culture, and at the same point of time, also thinking about collectivism. So it can be something like, if you compare what was happening before the rise of nationalism in Europe, in the name of unity, in the name of spiritualism, we were having few ideas which were dominating the whole of Europe. And as I was saying, the power nexus was so prominent, was so prevalent at that time. And that's why scholars and reformers like Martin Luther, they actually revolted against it. And why they had to revolt against it? Because they were understanding that it seems something like a unity, but it's not actually like a unity, because in the name of unity, possibly the individual voices, possibly the voices of the nation, they were being overlooked. So we couldn't do that, we couldn't carry on with that. So the European people, possibly they were smart enough, and they were able to figure out something like that we can do something, individualism with collectivism. uh, Thorough individualism is wrong, thorough collectivism can also be wrong, because that was happening in the Middle Ages, where when we see that how different kings and queens, they claimed that they were the representatives of the Almighty God, and they were doing a lot of things which were there, which were not for the benefit of humanity. So you will find that when Renaissance, with the coming of Renaissance, we saw the rise of nationalism. We also saw that how individualism was collectively working with collectivism, and they were thinking that individual voices in different nations should also be given preference. And then we can finally think about a larger cause, which can be the collectivism of Europe. And you can also think about it, even if you look at the 20th century history of Europe, sorry, you can think about that how different nations can talk about the idea of, you know, if we go simply in the political sense, if you think about the existence of European Union, and then you think about how different nations are talking about, their culture, their spirit, their nation. So it's something like that, having the idea of individualism along with collectivism. I think this can be the question from answer from my side, but once again, you can have debate on that.
Rashi has another question as well. And she asks, while the course of English observed a significant shift from its archaic form towards the modern form during Renaissance, why the writers of the time were still fixated on using the archaic form of the language?
Okay. So there are two reasons. For example, if you talk about writers largely, then it's quite difficult to put them into categories, and you cannot fix any guidelines for the writers, because the creative thinkers always believe in breaking the rules. So there were some people who were following the guidelines, who were doing something for the development of English language, modern English language, and they were thinking that we should be able to recognize the value of English language. We should be able to recognize a language of our own. But at the same time, there were many writers who believed that the greatness lies in classicism, the greatness lies in difficulty, the greatness lies in something which is not with us, but we have to borrow it. We have to, we have to, we have to borrow it from a different culture. So that idea of using the archaic expressions, that idea of using those Latin expressions, for example, if you read Francis Bacon, in many of his essays, you can find examples of direct quotations in Latin language. Why he was doing that? Because it was not he was not simply believing in the idea that English can answer all questions, but there were moments when they need to borrow few things from different cultures, so they were providing a space for that. And there is one more thing. There is always a league of writers who believe that there is something in literature which can have a value if we talk in archaic words, if we use a language which is very close to the classical expressions. For example, it was not only with writers like writers who were writing in 16th century. You will find that too in even in many modern writers or in Victorian writers who were writing and who were believing that difficulty as fashion can also be practicable in literature. But there was one more reason that why some writers were using archaic words, because I called it a transition period, Renaissance as a transition period. So it's not very easy to find a very sharp dividing line between the old Middle English and the modern English. We can see that the changes are slowly taking place. And when we talk about language, if you if you have read about linguistics, in linguistics we always say that we always use the word evolution for language. We never say development. Why do we say evolution? Because we believe that languages evolve like human beings. We borrow this word from Origin of a Species, published by Charles Darwin, and we believe that languages also evolve. So this evolution process, it takes place gradually. So you can find that there were many writers who were in 16th century using some archaic words, Latin expressions, because it was taking some time to actually you know I will not say get rid of, but actually to actually find a new language or new expression, or to actually give it a definite shape. So it was taking some time. I think that might be the reason. Thank you so much.
Okay, you have mentioned Charles Darwin, and we have next question, which has this uh, uh, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution of humanism. Here she has mentioned. Maybe Priyam wanted to say human kind. So his question is, sir, can we correlate the Renaissance period of humanism with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution of mankind?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. uh, I think it can be something interesting. If somebody is going to study it, it can be interesting, but I have never thought about it. So but it seems like a very good idea. There can be availability of studies on this topic, on this interrelationship, if there is any. But we have to study it. So I'm not having any good understanding about this comparison. But yes, you can say that to a certain extent, because there is one idea which can help you in understanding it, but I cannot say much about it. If you look at the whole of Europe, if you look at not only Europe, but I'll say, if you look at the whole development of knowledge in Western tradition, then you will find uh, from the Renaissance time period till 20th century, you will find that the philosophers and scientists, they all have they all have published books in response to other books. For example, if you read uh, b- other philosophical texts, if you talk about philosophers, largely we say that a philosopher always builds upon the shoulders of its predecessor, or or the philosopher who existed before him. Because we cannot think in vacuum. We have to borrow ideas from different writers, and then we can say something in favor of them, or we can argue against these ideas. And you will find that if you trace this whole, if you look at the whole development of knowledge from Renaissance till 20th century, then you will find there are many books which actually responded to books. And that's why we see a connected chain of thought. That's why many postmodern thinkers used to talk about that we can believe that there is a system of thought which existed since the Cartesian period. Cartesian means René Descartes. From René Descartes' name, we made this word Cartesian. So from the Cartesian thinking, if you come down to this 20th century, you can see a chain of thought. Because when, for example, let's say when René Descartes was saying, "I think, therefore I am," in 1980s, we have a scholar who was saying, "I consume, therefore I am." And he believed that, for René Descartes, thinking was something, a matter related to existence. For me, consumption is something which is a matter related to existence. Things are different, but the expressions are having, you can say, the pattern is almost similar. The pattern of saying things, giving the expression, is quite similar. So you can find these kind of relationships are there, because the Western system of knowledge, it actually follows a system of thought, one after another. And one more example I would like to give in this line. Uh, if you look at this whole idea of Renaissance, it's the post-Renaissance time period then, and then you look at how the idea of liberalism became prominent in 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 politics, in different political spheres, in different expressions, in different discourses, in humanistic scholarship as well, and how this idea of liberalism became popular in the field of economics as well, when somebody like Adam Smith published a book like Wealth of Nations, when he was talking about liberated uh, economic values. And then we saw, not the origin of a species, but we saw the publication of Das Kapital by Karl Marx. And there are many scholars who believe that had there been no publication like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, there wouldn't have been any publication like Das Kapital by Karl Marx. Because Karl Marx's Das Kapital is more like, you can say, a reaction. It seems like a reaction against a reaction to other books, or Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, books which are like Wealth of Nations. So you can find that there are books responding to books, there are ideas responding to ideas, there are ideas which are byproduct of ideas. So they all are related. And that's why, you can see that we can believe that there is a system of thought which has been followed by different philosophers, writers, thinkers, and scientists. I think so it can be a good study. You can do it, or any other student who is interested in that can do that. So I'm not having much knowledge about it, because for that you have to study both these aspects individually, and then you have to establish the relationship between these two phenomena. And you have to, for example, study that how Renaissance, or whatever was happening in Renaissance, a spirit of questioning, reasoning, argument, how it was related to what Charles Darwin was doing when he was writing Origin of a Species. For example, Charles Darwin was also, he was also arguing with the church people. when he was publishing his Origin of Species, he used to have argument with the religious scholars, because they used to talk about they used to deny evolution. They used to believe in the Bible, and he was talking about something else. So the spirit of questioning, debating, argument was there. Something was there which was very much related, but it can be studied in detail. Thank you so much.
Neha ma'am, you're not audible.
Oh, that's the. Ankita has one question, and how did humanism during Renaissance different from earlier traditional medieval ideas? But I think she got her answer because the first question was almost similar, and lot of appreciation is there for your presentation. And I think we are done with the question answer session, and now I invite Saket to express our gratitude towards our resource person of today.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir, for the very enriching session. You very admiringly figured the relation between humanism and Renaissance. Thank you for sharing your valuable cognizance on the topic. It was very informative, indeed, for all the participants. Thanks to all the faculty members and the participants as well. It was the 10th lecture of this course. We will again meet tomorrow at the same time for the lecture of day 11. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sunij sir.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm thankful to all of you that you gave me a chance to speak. I'm thankful to you,
Thank you, Sunij bhai.
sir.
How is life in Aligarh? Matlab, with
So
regard to
slow,
all
so
these.
slow, very slow, very slow.
So
And
still there are cases of corona.
yes, still there are cases, because today